Hi book friends, I'm Erin, and this is Erin Go Read. Today I'm going to talk about my 10 favorite books from the first half of June. Now this is actually the second time I'm filming this. I got through about book 6 before, and I realized the air conditioning cut off, and all of a sudden it got very quiet. I didn't realize the air conditioning was on until it went off. So then when I went back to edit the video, it is very clear that the air conditioning is on, so I am refilming the first 6 books here. So if going into the 7th book or midway through the 6th book, all of a sudden the lighting changes or my position changes a little bit, it's because that was the original filming after the air conditioner went off. So, air conditioner is off and I might be sweating because of it, but let's get into it. So the first one I'm going to talk about, sneak peek, is a bit of a cheat. I technically read it in December, but it came out in 2019. I didn't have a channel in December. It did make it to my very first video, which was my favorites of 2018, but I'm sure that was awful. Don't go back and watch that one. But this book has resurfaced, or surfaced on BookTube recently. I've seen several people have been reading it. That is The Far Field by Madhuri Vijay. First of all, beautiful cover, and the content inside. CV, move. Sorry. Okay, I'm going to try to give a brief description of this book, but this takes place, starts off in India, and our main character is a recent college grad. Her family is pretty well-to-do. Her father is a business owner, and she is grieving the loss of her mother, and we get, gosh, it's been so long since I read it. I think the time with her mother we see kind of in flashback memories of her, and she ends up in the grieving process after kind of spending a good amount of time just kind of loafing around, kind of not knowing what she wants to do with herself. In her grief, she ends up going to Kashmir. Now, there is trouble in Kashmir, there's war in Kashmir, and that is definitely in the backdrop of what's happening, but we never really it's never It's never in the forefront, really, of the story, kind of mentioned in passing, and it affects her. There are moments where it is more involved, but most of the time it is very much in the backdrop of what's happening. She goes up to Kashmir because there was a traveling salesman when she was a girl that would come frequently and kind of hang out at her house. And there was a friendship, a relationship between her mother and this man, and she goes up there to find out more about this man and her mother and ultimately about herself. Beautiful writing, and we see what starts as a kind of, not exactly not spoiled, but kind of privileged young woman go from this pretty affluent lifestyle into a very, very different lifestyle in Kashmir, and the growth that she experiences. The field where she grows is the far field. All right, the next book is the second book I've read from this author. This is Elizabeth Acevedo's second book. This is With the Fire on High. The first book, The Poet X, was told in verse. This is not told in verse. We follow a teenage young lady. She's a senior in high school, and she has a little girl. And she lives with her grandmother, and it's basically about kind of her decision-making process of what she's going to do with her life. And I really connected with that kind of senior year of high school, pondering what are you going to do with the rest of your life. She also has a child to consider in her future plans, but she loves to cook, and her dream is to be a chef. And so we have some really great relationships, peer relationship with her grandmother and with some adult kind of mentors that really help her make the decision and become basically start her on the journey of who she's going to be capable of being. And another thing I really liked about this book, particularly for a young adult audience, it really values hard work, and how when you really want to achieve something, then you gonna put your nose to the grindstone and work hard to achieve that. Next up, a little-known book. You might not have heard of it before, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. If you've never heard of this book, watch like 2 more YouTube videos, and I'm sure, booktube videos, and I'm sure you will come across it again. This is the tale of a journalist who is handpicked by this aging Hollywood starlet to write her biography. And so we find out about the life, the actual true life of this Hollywood starlet. There were things that were presumed or assumed, reported on throughout her life, which may or may not have some partial truths in them. And so we find out the real story behind it all. And then we also find out more about the journalist and why is it that Miss Evelyn Hugo chose this particular journalist, to tell her story. This was excellent. Just so engrossing, and I'm really excited to get to Daisy Jones and the Six, her follow-up to this. Then we have some sci-fi. The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This is the first in the Wayfarers series. Our main character, Rosemary Harper, arrives at on the Wayfarer, a ship whose function is to basically create these like gateways, portal thingies through space, and she's there. She has like basically an administrative job. Through Rosemary getting to know the ship and the crew members of the ship, we learn about the ship and the crew members of the ship, and is really a character-driven book. One of my favorite characters I did the mid-year book freakout tag. This book was one of my favorites, and Sissix, a character in this, she's actually the pilot of the ship, is one of my favorite characters of the year so far. So it's definitely a character-driven novel that does not lack for plot. And one thing that I really enjoyed about this is when you think about sci-fi and fantasy or historical fiction, world building is a big part of the experience and what we're looking for. And she does, I think, some excellent world building just in their spaceship. And there are some other settings within the book, but primarily this spaceship is their home and their workplace, and the interactions that happen. There's some really amazing kind of rooms within the spaceship that I thought was really fun, and I just can't wait to read more Becky Chambers. I just got I can't remember what it's called, but I just got the follow-up to this book. From what I understand, they're not technically like sequels. They're 3 companion novels, as far as I understand. So I don't even know if the same characters are in it. I hope Sissix is in there. All right, and then we have a fantasy. This is Red Sister by Mark Lawrence, and this is just an amazing cover, I think. And this is basically a boarding school at a monastery for young girls to become fighting magical nuns. And it's really awesome. So the world that they live in, I can't remember, it's like a 50 or 100 mile kind of band through the center of the planet that is only that band is habitable because the rest of the world is frozen. And even this habitable band is quite cold, hence all of the snow. And there are different ways that these nuns can utilize magic. It like manifests itself differently in different people. We find out about how our main character will learn magic, utilize magic, and then how she and kind of the nuns fit into the greater scheme of what's happening in the world. And finally, we have The Island of Sea Women by Lisa See. This is a historical fiction novel taking place on the island of Jeju off the coast of South Korea. And I think it's kind of between South Korea and Japan. And at the time that the book starts, Korea is colonized by Japan, and then it gets, the Japanese leave, the Americans come in, and then we have the beginnings of the Korean War conflict. And so that's all kind of happening in the background of our main story, and certainly affects the lives of our main characters. So the sea women are the Haenyeo, and this is a group of women on this island of Jeju who are extremely skilled divers. They free dive and they fish. So octopus and urchin and oysters and clams and whatever. And we find out more about the history of why it is that they do this. And there's a relationship at the center of this between two female best friends, two Haenyeo, both coming from very different backgrounds. And then as the political climate and world events change, how that impacts their relationship. And this book was so just real. I really felt like I was there, and I actually had a hard time in portions of this book, like the beginning of the last third or end of the middle, something like that, where things were just going so terribly poorly for our characters that I had a really hard time reading it for very long, or necessarily wanting to get through it. I had to kind of push myself through at a certain point because it was just so devastating, the things that were happening to them. And there was one particular scene where my jaw dropped and I was reading with my eyebrows popping off my head. I couldn't believe that this actually was happening to people. And of course we know terrible things happen in the world, but Lisa C. writes it in such a way that just really had an impact on me. I know that Lisa C. writes a lot of, I think it's primarily like Chinese American fiction, so I'm definitely interested in reading more by Lisa C. If you happen to know, if you've read any of Lisa C. before and you have a particular book to recommend to me, I would love to know about that in the comments. Okay, now back to earlier me. So the lighting or positioning might be slightly different. I think my lipstick, my lipstick is probably gone because I just ate dinner. So here we go. And another historical fiction, we have Washington Black by S.E. Adugin. It's historical fiction with maybe like a slice of sci-fi, I suppose, only because science is used in a fictional way, I guess. So we have Washington Black is a slave. He's a boy, and he has a terrible master, and the brother of the master comes and basically uses him because he's the right size to fit in his flying machine that he wants to create, and he's also a very talented artist, so he can draw the plans for his flying machine. And they end up going off and having lots of adventures, and it's so much more than that. I really like an adventure story, and I got this from that with some complexity and insight into the depth of humanity. Then we have The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, and this is a very small, quiet little novel that follows a butler, Stevenson, who is, he's kind of thinking about the changing times and how he reminisces about the good old days, basically, of the great manor house where he has been the butler for many years, and when the house was full of servants and visitors, and it was just vivacious. And now there's kind of a rising middle class at this point. The old master of the manor is now gone, and an American owns the place, and there are far fewer servants. Everything is much less grand, and he's on a road trip to go visit another former employee at the manor house, and he's kind of reminiscing over these times. And my favorite part of it is just Stevenson is so lovable and so almost like adorable, because he is just so genuinely serious about the art and the skill of being a butler and what it means to serve in a great house. And he is just so proud of it. And can you really be a great butler if you haven't served in a great house? And I will definitely be rereading this book at one point. And this really totally sold me on Kazuo Ishiguro. Two more. We have The Martian by Andy Weir. This was part of this is on the Great American Read list, and so I read it for that purpose. My husband and I read it together, and we absolutely loved it. My favorite part of it is, well, first of all, if you don't know the story, it's there's a manned mission to Mars. The astronauts are on the surface of Mars doing collecting soil or something like that. And a big like dust storm comes in, and Mark Watney, our main character, ends up getting like impaled by like an antenna or something through his suit. And then the other astronauts are trying to find him, and they can't, and they saw the injury, and so they assume that he's dead. And Watney says, yeah, you should have assumed I was dead. And they have to abort the entire mission and leave Mars and go home. I think they have to end their mission by like 7 days or something like that. So Watney then, wakes up and realizes he's on Mars alone, and he has survived this, and he has the hab, which is like the habitat area that they live in when they're on Mars, and he has to figure out a way to survive, how to get food for himself after the rations run out, and can he eventually get home? Can he get in contact with NASA? All that. And so we follow things from his point of view through these kind of video diaries that he makes, and then through NASA's perspective and what's happening back on Earth at NASA and them trying to rescue him. My favorite part of this is just the amazing ingenuity and application of knowledge and wisdom and like figure it outness that Watney uses. And it actually, in a middle grade that I just reread, was Hatchet, and the same thing happened, but Hatchet by Gary Paulson. That same kind of it's a literally do or die situation, and you have to use what you have around you, your own intelligence and grit to just get through the situation and survive. And so, if you like The Martian, you might like Hatchet. If you like Hatchet, or if you liked Hatchet when you were a kid, you might like The Martian for that same reason. And then finally, we have Deb Coletti's A Heart and a Body in a World. In this, we follow a 17-year-old high school student who is a runner, and there's something that's happened, some terrible tragedy that has happened in the past. Everyone seems to know about it. She seems to be well known, but we don't know what has happened. She basically can't handle anymore. She just can't deal, and she takes off running, and her destination is Washington, D.C., from Washington State. So as she makes this incredible journey, she has the support of her grandfather, who drives along in his RV, and then her brother and her mom and her friends rally around her behind the scenes, and they create a GoFundMe, and they have all the support so that she can accomplish this goal. And so as the story goes, and as she builds some relationships and some trust and kind of deals with this through her run, we find out in bits and pieces, and then finally the full story of what had happened in the past. And I have to say, it did surprise me. I thought it was going to be something other than it was. Related, but totally different. And I related to this on so many levels. I'm a woman. I'm a runner. I have been in a relationship, a very serious relationship at a young age. I ended up marrying my high school sweetheart. So there are so many elements of this that I related to, and I don't often feel this way with, I say I don't often feel this way with YA books, but I don't read a lot of YA books. With the Fire on High was a YA book, and I think for me, in order for me to, as a 35-year-old, for me to enjoy a YA book, I think there has to be somewhat of a mature protagonist, and we have that in both with The Fire on High and A Heart in the Body of the World. My interest is now piqued in Deb Coletti. I don't know if she only writes YA fiction. I'll probably look into that at some point, but I definitely enjoyed this one. So these are my top 10 favorite books of the first half of 2019. Please let me know in the comments if you read any of these, loved any of these, if you hated any of these. I'd love to discuss books down in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you on the tubes. Fly.